Hello guys, and welcome back to our channel. If you haven't yet subscribed, then please do so because you will find our videos interesting. Don't forget to give our videos a thumbs up by tapping on the like button and be part of the commenters squad by sharing your thoughts, your views in the comment section down below. Now, I welcome you to today's video where we will be taking a look into the latest developments in the world of politics and religion. Now, today we're talking about the F around and finding out season for evangelicals who voted for Trump. It's been a wild ride, and it seems like some evangelical leaders are finally getting a taste of their own medicine. Now, as we've seen time and time again, Trump has a history of using evangelical voters to further his own agenda, and it looks like some of them are finally starting to realize that they've been played. Now, in the first video, I will be sharing a clip of a man who reveals that evangelical leaders around the country are feeling used and ignored by Trump, who's not returning their phone calls now that he's been re-elected. Now, this is a contrast to the phoning praise and attention Trump lavished on evangelicals during his campaign, when he was desperate for their votes, of course. But now that he's back in power, it seems like he's not interested in hearing from them anymore. And let's be real here, this is what happens when you sell your soul to a politician who only cares about himself. So with that said, let's take a look at these videos. I will be right back, and make sure to watch this video until the very end because I'll also be sharing a sermon of the Baptist pastor who got fired after preaching about the mega fascism. Take a look at the videos. I'll be right back.
This just in. Top evangelical leaders around the country say they feel used because Trump is ignoring their phone calls, not returning any phone calls since he got reelected. But of course, during the campaign, I love the evangelicals. I love the evangelicals. Evangelicals, they love Trump. They just love Trump.
My friend, Reverend Dr. Ben Boswell, was recently forced to resign from his pastorate at the progressive Myers Park Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, after giving this sermon following the re-election of Donald Trump, where he preached and spoke out against MAGA fascism and tried to inspire hope and try to mobilize people to resist. The full sermon is 23 minutes long. It's on YouTube. I encourage you to go watch it. I've edited it down to about 12 minutes, which is a lot for TikTok, but I hope you'll watch this all the way to the end. These are just the highlights, the stuff that I found really inspiring and interesting and encouraging. There's a little tribute to the late Tony Campolo, who recently died, at the very end. Thanks for watching. Be inspired. Don't do nothing. Mobilize, build, resist.
We need time now to grieve, to cover our mirrors, to rend our garments, to sit in sackcloth and ashes, to scream, to weep, to mourn, to howl at the moon if necessary. But as we grieve, we must remember Paul's words from 1 Thessalonians 4. Yes, we are people who grieve, but we do not grieve as people who have no hope. You may not know this, but there is only one democratic election in all of Scripture. It was hosted by Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem, where he gave the crowd a choice of who they would elect to pardon: Jesus of Nazareth or Jesus Barabbas. It was a choice between two versions of the Jewish religion, two viewpoints of the empire, two valleys by which to travel, two visions of salvation and the future. But fundamentally, if you look carefully, it was the choice between a healer from Galilee and an extremist who led an insurrection at the Capitol where people were. That's the choice. And the crowd chose Barabbas. It's a choice we are now very familiar with. This week was not the first time the crowd has made a perilous and misguided choice. One of the reasons we grieve today is because we've been told quite clearly that the election of Donald Trump will lead to the crucifixion of people we love. It will lead to the crucifixion of immigrant families, women in need of reproductive rights, transgender and non-binary people, sick people in need of health care, government workers clinging to a job, poor people in need of resources. And so we grieve today with our entire body for those who we love. But our faith also teaches us something else. It teaches us that every crucifixion needs a witness. This week on Instagram, an Episcopal priest named Joseph Yu said something that really got me thinking. He said, the Jesus movement has always been most effective, most captivating, most contagious, most powerful, most transformative under the rule of the empire. That's when we're at our best. So keep that in mind as we move forward, he said, and let's cause some damage to this empire with the tools that we've been given of sacrificial love and generosity and forgiveness and grace and hope and love. Hope may be frail, but it's hard to kill. Erik Larson's best-selling book, In the Garden of Beasts, begins, I have always wondered what it would have been like to witness firsthand the gathering dark of Hitler's rule. Hindsight tells us, he writes, that during that fragile time, history could have been changed and gone in a different direction. Why then did no one seek to change it? Why did it take so long to recognize the real danger that Hitler and the Nazi regime posed? The answer is that few were able or willing to fully recognize the threat that Hitler posed, including the American ambassador in Berlin at the time, William Dodd, who brought his family to Berlin in 1933. Throughout that first year, Larson writes, Dodd was struck by the strange indifference to atrocity that had settled over the nation. The willingness of everyday people and moderate elements within the government to accept each new oppressive decree, each new act of violence without protest. And yet the ambassador resigned himself to, in his own words, the delicate work of watching and carefully doing nothing. Whether from self-preservation or self-delusion, people increasingly failed to challenge what they knew to be lies and propaganda and allowed themselves to be swept up in a creeping morass of ignorance and barbarity. They failed to condemn the bigotry and the cruelty that they could hear and the political rhetoric every day and saw happening on the streets. And so the terrifying conclusion that one reaches when reading Larson's book is that vigilance, honesty, and courage on the part of many inside and outside of Germany during those early years could have stopped Hitler and that fascist regime in its tracks. But without vigilance, we surrender our integrity slowly, by degrees. Before long, we discover we've lost everything important to us, including what defined us as human beings or as Christians, like our faith and our freedom. But there were also brave people at that same time who witnessed what was taking place and resisted the rise of fascism from the very beginning. One of the most famous was a theologian who lived in Berlin at the exact same time as Ambassador Dodd, named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Hitler was elected chancellor on January 30th, 1933. And just 2 days after Hitler took power on February 1st, Bonhoeffer delivered a radio address publicly criticizing the Nazi Party and their concept of the Führer, or supreme leader, which was what Hitler was calling himself back then. And Bonhoeffer asked, to what extent does leading and being led become pathological? He warned his fellow Germans that a leader who makes themselves an idol is a misleader who mocks God. And those who concede their power to a strong man or supreme leader promoting the rebirth of a nation will eventually be destroyed by him. But the radio broadcast, no surprise, was abruptly cut off by the Nazis before Bonhoeffer could complete his speech. Bonhoeffer was the first to recognize that Hitler's policies against the Jews were a problem for the church and an empirically political one. A month after his radio address, not even 2 months into Hitler's leadership, Bonhoeffer published an essay titled The Church and the Jewish Question, where he claimed that National Socialism was an illegitimate form of government that had to be opposed on Christian grounds. Bonhoeffer outlined 3 stages of opposition in that early writing. First, that the church is always called to question state injustice. Second, that it has an obligation to help all the victims of state injustice, whether they are Christian or not. And finally, if the state's actions lead to a lack of rights and disorder, the church is called to jam a spoke in the wheel of the state and bring the machinery of injustice to a halt. A year later, in the summer of 34, Bonhoeffer pressed his fellow pastors by proclaiming, "We are immediately faced with a decision. Are we National Socialist or are we Christian? Because Christianity stands or falls with its revolutionary protest against violence, arbitrariness, pride of power, with its plea for the weak and the vulnerable. After being arrested and imprisoned on April 9th, 1945, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was marched naked to the gallows at the Flossenburg concentration camp. He was 39 years old, and the camp where he was liberated by Allied forces only a few weeks later. From 1933 to the day that Bonhoeffer bravely and openly opposed Hitler and the Nazi regime, he once wrote, "As much as the Christian would like to remain distant from the political struggle, the commandment to love urges us to stand up for our neighbors. Our faith must always know when the dictates of the state may lead us against our conscience." A good friend of this church, Dr. Bill Leonard, and many others in our community have described the crisis we face today as a Bonhoeffer moment. And I agree. But we should be very precise about what we mean by this phrase. What we mean is that fascism has swept in with the wind, and our nation has elected a man who openly describes himself as a dictator. But Bonhoeffer is more than a description. The question is not just, is this a Bonhoeffer moment? But how will we respond to this moment? Will we be like Ambassador Dodd or Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Will we do the delicate work of watching and carefully doing nothing? Or will we stand up, speak the truth, witness against injustice, help all the victims, and jam a spoke into the machinery of empire? Christians are not the only people wrestling with this question today. Politicians, government workers, leaders in every area of society and industry are grappling with the way the winds blew this Tuesday, including journalists in this country. And on the morning after the election, Jesse Eisinger, a senior editor at ProPublica, delivered these words to his staff. "We face now the biggest test of our professional lives. Now we get to see if we really meant it when we said we will hold power to account. Will we do so when our subjects have true power on their side and a willingness to use it against us? We may be harassed. We may be sued. We may be threatened with violence. We may be ignored." But then he said, "Are we sunshine journalists or are we ready?" So a lot of people are asking, where do we go from here? I think a midwife from Wisconsin said it best this week. "You are awakening to the same country you fell asleep to. The very same country. Pull yourself together. And when you see me, do not ask me, what do we do now, or how do we get through the next 4 years? Some of my ancestors," she wrote, "dealt with 400 years of this under worse conditions." So she said, continue to do the good work you're doing. Continue building bridges, continue leading with compassion, continue demanding justice and liberation, continue dismantling broken systems, continue to set the best example you can for the children, continue to be a vessel of nourishing joy, continue right where you are, right where you live. Do it in the name of the Creator who expects nothing less from each and every one of us. And if you are not continuing all of the above in community, in partnership, in collaboration, what is it that you have been doing, she asks. And what are you waiting for? If it's a Bonhoeffer moment, then we need a Bonhoeffer movement. A community of people who know that every crucifixion needs a witness. People who are like the women on Easter, who go to the grave of the crucified looking for a resurrection. People like Bonhoeffer who will stand up and speak out and fight against fascism and fight against injustice, no matter what the cost is. We need people who will cling to each other, who are committed to being vigilant, who will not be silent, who will not give up, who will never surrender, who will love our neighbors, who will refuse to believe that this is the end, who will work for liberation every single day, who will dismantle broken systems, who will pour ourselves out like vessels of joy for other people, people who refuse to be just sunshine Christians, but who want to be cross and resurrection Christians, people who know that to truly follow Jesus, we have to hold on to our hope for dear life. Because while it may feel like Friday right now, while it might feel like Saturday right now, Sunday is coming. And we have to believe that.
Now, let me just share what another Trump presidency meant to evangelicals around the world. As Americans were headed to the polls, the rest of the world watched to see who would become the 47th president of the United States. The election of Donald Trump affects many evangelical communities around the world in terms of foreign policy, foreign aid, religious freedom, and cultural trends. Nevertheless, Christian leaders in some countries noted that it didn't make a difference to them who becomes the next president of the US. Now, CT asked 26 evangelical leaders around the world about their reaction to another Trump presidency and its practical impact on the situation of evangelicals in their countries. Now, on behalf of many like-minded evangelicals in Kenya, I congratulate the American people for electing Trump. We hope that this election will usher in a season where Orthodox Christian beliefs are not frowned upon or criminalized by American state agencies. We also hope that American institutions operating in Africa will freely engage with African people without pushing an immoral agenda. Africa wants to honor God and the laws of nature, and we hope that America under the president-elect will be tolerant of that. Our choices and freedoms should be respected. We hope that our cultures and people will be treated as equal partners and deserving of mutual respect. In light of Nigeria's ongoing economic and political difficulties, this US election was not debated locally, nearly as much as the prior two. For evangelicals, neither candidate was an easy option. Harris was considered more level-headed, but a strong support of unaliving of unborn babies and LGBTQ rights made many uncomfortable. Trump's moral stances resonated with our core evangelical convictions, but his own lack of morality and perceived palm color supremacy created some concerns. We hope we will become more open to immigration. Now, different evangelicals from different countries shared what another Trump presidency meant for them. Now, talking about evangelicals being in support of Trump, we also saw how evangelicals fired up Trump's support with messianic messages. Some were even saying that the 2024 presidential race is a fight for America's soul and a persecuted Trump has God's protection. They're just trying to bankrupt him. They're trying to take everything is God. They're trying to put him in prison. Author, media personality, and self-proclaimed prophet Lance Warnow said in October on the Jim Baker Show, an hour-long daily broadcast that focuses on news and revelations about the end times that it says we are living in. Now, the hand of God is on him, and he cannot be stopped. In both the 2016 and 2020 elections, evangelical voters staunchly supported Trump, despite claims of adultery and misconduct, which he denied. With Trump now facing dozens of criminal charges as he pursued a second term, some Christian media were bolstering his support by portraying him as an instrument of God's will who faces persecution by his foes. While the people making these claims are largely outside the mainstream and Christian media, they have amassed significant online followings, and their messages reverberate across radio shows, cable TV, and streaming platforms that reach millions of Americans every day. Now, the claims that Trump benefits from divine help present a jarring counterpoint to the views voiced by his critics, who denounce him as an immoral grifter set on dismantling democracy and point to his inflammatory rhetoric about immigrants in the country illegally and opponents he has threatened to persecute. Now, talking about pastors being fired for preaching about the MAGA fascism, this is not something that is starting to happen now. We also saw how in 2020, Cope was fired from his church in June after he gave a sermon criticizing evangelical Christians' embrace of then-President Donald Trump. Now, Recon talked to Cope about the reasons why he left his church, what led up to his departure, and how the American evangelicalism is changing. Now, here's what Cope had to say. I literally broke that morning of May 31, 2020. I had a crisis of faith and could no longer keep silent. I was going to preach an entirely different sermon. COVID was just really starting to influence the churches. We were no longer meeting inside the building. I set up a worship platform on a flatbed trailer out in the parking lot. What I have discovered is that people don't mind politics from the pulpit. So long as biblical politics resonate with their own personal opinion. When the Bible's political values confront the world of politics and worldly values that they are holding, is when they start to have problems with it. You know that these things are wrong. Unaliving or adultery, immorality, theft, false testimony, slander, and every single one of them characterizes Trump. You don't like hearing it, and I don't like having to say it. It's true. Jesus condemns it because it is the actions of someone who is anti-Christ. I have been at greater peace since May the 31st than I have experienced in years. I was met by deacons immediately after the service, and the next day I was told that people were demanding my resignation. On the next Tuesday, I was told that they wanted my resignation, and on Wednesday, I gave it to them. If I get this kind of a negative response from people who I love and with whom I work with, who I've been close to for decades, and they throw away 14 years of preaching and teaching and ministering all in one sermon, then I don't know that I could go forward with these people. I'm done with it. The Southern Baptist Convention, they were on the wrong side of slavery in the 1860s. They are on the wrong side of Black Lives Matter. They are on the wrong side of women in ministry. They are on the wrong side of harassment. They are on the wrong side in so much. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Now, the effing around and finding out season is indeed just getting started for evangelicals, and it's about time. It's clear that Trump will stop at nothing to get what he wants, including making empty promises and showering praise on evangelicals just to secure their votes. But now that he's got what he needs, it's a whole different story. Trump doesn't actually care about evangelicals or their values. He only cares about one thing: winning. And if that means using evangelicals as pawns in his game of power, then so be it. It's a classic case of use and discard. And evangelicals are finally starting to realize that they've been played. Let's be real here, people. Trump's history of flip-flopping on issues and breaking promises is well documented. He's a master manipulator who will say and do whatever it takes to get ahead. And evangelicals, unfortunately, have fallen hook, line, and sinker for his charms. But now that the dust has settled and Trump has secured his power, evangelicals are starting to wake up to the harsh reality. They are realizing that they've been used and that Trump's words were nothing more than empty rhetoric. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it is what it is. And it's about time someone taught them the truth. So to all the evangelicals out there who are feeling betrayed and used, let this be a lesson to you. Be careful who you trust and don't be so quick to believe the sweet nothings whispered in your ear by power-hungry politicians. You deserve better than to be treated like pawns in someone else's game of power. Now finally come to the end of the video, but what do you, my viewers, have to say about this? Share your thoughts, your views as well in the comment section. Thank you for always watching, and see you in our next video as we bring you another interesting video.